I think we all sort of had an experience of maybe seeing a beautiful painting or seeing a beautiful sunset or a Grand Canyon and at dawn or something, and there's a sense of awe. We're moved at a deep level, and we're wired, I think, to appreciate beauty. But you've done a great job of just describing how that's really built into our Creator. God wired us to value, to respect beauty, because apparently He does too.
Yeah, well, one of the things, because beauty's been a thing. Like you said, I did my doctoral work in aesthetics and beauty. Obviously, I was attracted to that topic for obvious reasons, beauty. But because there is something about that almost feels tragic to me. Like I think if you ask a lot of Christians, are you for beauty or against it? Every one of us is probably going to say, of course we're for beauty, and yet the way we actually think about it or talk about it almost buys into a lot of the more like secular narratives about beauty. Like if you think of sort of the classic, they call them the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful. If you think of sort of the way that the church and Christians have engaged with those three, we very heavily sort of push back against the relativism of truth, that truth isn't relative, or we've pushed back and kind of stood firm that no, there's not moral relativism, like there's good, and all those are linked to God. And yet when it comes to beauty, we've almost sort of thoughtlessly or sort of blindly just accepted that, it's just a subjective thing. It's just in the eye of the beholder. There is no real standard for beauty. It's just what you like, what you don't like. And we've lost a lot of what the kind of theological kind of grounding for beauty that, like actually beauty, if you read scripture, is also flows from God. And if it flows from God, then it's not a subjective thing, because we can't see God as not beautiful. God is objectively beautiful. And I think because we've kind of unaware bought into a lot of the narratives about beauty, it's just sort of a subjective, a meaningless thing that's good to have, but if we don't have it, that's fine. That we haven't really, I guess, tapped into that in the way that the power of beauty to, in scripture, it talks about this creation, proclaims the glory of God, and the way that points people towards God. Then kind of in our book, we look at different ways of doing that. But if beauty is, if we do root it back in like a objective theological foundation that points people towards God, then how can we as the church, or as, someone that's just engaging with people, how can we use beauty or foster beauty, whether that's in our church or our lives or kind of just in nature, to point people towards sort of His goodness and truth?
And I love some of what you do there in this book. Even you talk about the fact that, like the tabernacle, God has a lot of things that He puts in there, and then later in the temple, that have no functionality really. It's just pure artwork. It's cherubim embroidered into the curtain or something like that. And about you point out that the very first time that someone is described as the Spirit filling them is actually for an artisan working on the temple or the tabernacle, not just a warrior fighting against the Philistines or something. And I think that's fascinating. We've underplayed that. We look at that as sort of a secondary kind of attribute of God, but there's something wired in us. I think that when we appreciate what's beautiful, I think in one sense we're appreciating our Creator. And
I think when you lose beauty too, then like those other two, goodness and truth, when beauty doesn't kind of hold those in check, then that can become a very like a judgmentalism and a legalism. If you have like morality, a goodness without beauty. And I think if you look at a lot of the skepticism and questions in culture today, it's aimed at the loss of beauty. That it's not necessarily, they might still disagree with some of the truth or the morality, what's good, but it's this image of the church that it's this sort of graceless place. It's not a place of love, not a place of beauty, because I think as the church we've sort of leaned into this, telling them the hard truth, or real standing firm in our morality, and just neglected the importance of sort of that beauty that radiates from God.
And don't you think, we've talked about this before, but in the Reformation, I think there was a pushback on some of the gaudy, over the top kind of ornamentalism and stuff that was brought into the church. And so a lot of the reformers just cleaned it out, just took out all the relics and a lot of the artwork, even the stained glass windows, and said it's just all about the word. It's about the truth. And of course, we believe in the truth. I'm a preacher. I believe in the preached word and the power of that. But I think some things have been lost because some church auditoriums were almost made to look like warehouses, and there was nothing beautiful about them. It was all about just we just focused on the word, on hearing the truth. But and I know, Mike, you just as a pastor, you see a lot of the worship stuff, but the younger generation is really getting back into the liturgical, isn't it? And is that, you think, a sense of wanting more beauty in worship? Not just they want to hear the preached word, but maybe you burn a candle or incense, or there's other things, there's other sense. You take communion every week or often, so your sense of taste is involved. And I think there's more to the beauty of worship than just hearing a sermon.
One, like auditory learning is about the least effective way to teach. Visuals are huge. Experiences, your sense of smell triggers your memory more strongly than anything else. And so it's interesting that we've stripped away a lot of that, and not all of it, right? There's music, and there's we try to put some plants up there on the stage or something like we try to use some of that, but I'm fascinated by the new generation. Like Gen Z is what everybody's focusing on, but then our own kids be this next generation coming up after them, and they're growing up in a very functional world. Technology has made things very, very functional, easily accessible. And the more that technology becomes prominent in trying to make our lives easier, oftentimes we can focus so much on that we see beauty and aesthetics and that sort of thing as extra, right? So why would you spend money on building a cathedral to look beautiful when all of that money could have been spent feeding the poor? And then but then we don't think but what about the people who come into this cathedral, experience God, they experience awe, they experience God in this place, aided by beauty, and they go on to become people who drastically reach the poor, right? Who changed the system. And it's like they were inspired by beauty, and then they went out and actually functionally did a lot from that. But we think, well, no, beauty is always just secondary. We need to focus on function first, when actually the two go together. And oftentimes functionality comes out of people who have been inspired by something, and inventors or others, they're driven by what they love, they're inspired by something, and that leads to invention or innovation, and then that has functional downstream, it has functional things that happen from it. But oftentimes, and I've been guilty of this, of downplaying beauty, right? Let's cut down the tree to put up a parking lot that's more functional, and that's kind of seen as the realm of the hippies care about that. And then the more industrialized our cities and stuff become, the more I think we start to miss that. And we realize, wait a sec though, you can feed the mind and leave the soul still starving.